What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. It is the long-awaited return of MLS History Retold as we begin to delve into MLS 2.0. The time of Designated Players is here. The focus on one David Beckham, but more than just the English superstar's arrival is happening at this time in MLS. So today we look back on the arrival of another MLS superstar to a lesser-known team who contributed arguably just as much as Beckham did to LA. We're talking about Blanco's arrival and impact on the Chicago Fire. Then we move down south and talk about one of the first real rivalries between MLS and Liga MX when Houston and Pachuca were going at it for glory on the border. I'm Andrew, that's Connor over there, and this is MLS History Retold. I missed that intro, man. Like that primed. This is what we're doing. It's good to be back. Good to be chatting MLS history yet again. We took a long break from it. I'm gonna quick check here when the last MLS history was.
It has been a long time for sure.
The last one we posted was November 15th, 2023. Goodness me, that's been forever. 193 the episode number was. We're now on 240. No, it'll be 241 based off of last week's episode. So it is good to be back. It's good to be chatting history for the first time in forever. For the first time in forever. Sorry.
Oh boy. Gonna be one of those days, huh?
It is. I'm all over the place. If you haven't checked out our last episode, we just finished recording it. It is a doozy, and we are still recovering from it. So go check that out. That's also about MLS history. We've argued a little bit about it, but this is more storytelling than arguing. But before we do any of that, we do have to talk scarves. I see you've got one. I've got one. Why don't you go first?
There's only one scarf I could bring out if we're talking about Blanco, and that is
The
upside down. It's because he turned the Chicago Fire upside down when he came here.
Cringe.
I didn't realize they were a Chicago Fire soccer club because on MLS Fantasy they're FC, not SC. So I don't know if that was a rebrand.
That was part of the very brief rebrand, if I remember correctly.
Boo.
Yeah.
Are you team FC or SC?
That's a loaded question. I'm always
that's a whole different. That's a whole episode, isn't it?
I'm always team SC over FC, but I'm also team fun name over European cosplay.
Yeah, I agree.
So, we're talking Houston. I break out the Houston scarf. It's just how these things roll.
Crazy.
But we do things in order, and I believe the order says you're up first.
All right. So we are here to talk about Blanco to the Chicago Fire. So when you think of MLS in the summer of 2007, who is the player you think of? Be honest. Be honest. Those who get that reference, you're elite. It was David Beckham. His announcement of coming to the LA Galaxy was going to change the game for MLS and really put them on the map. And spoiler alert for those that don't know the history, yeah, it kind of did. In that summer, there was another big star joining the league that may have been overlooked by some due to the Beckham starlights. His name was Cuauhtemoc Blanco. Before we get into his journey to the Chicago Fire, let's back up one step and talk about the designated player rule. The rule this podcast is even named after. The rule began in 2007 in order to enable teams to compete in the transfer market for star players. The rule allowed for teams to sign players that would be considered outside of the salary cap, which was only $2.1 million in 2007. This was originally named as the Beckham rule because the rule was implemented when he joined to allow teams like the LA Galaxy to sign players who otherwise would have no business fitting into the tight salary cap. At the start, if a player was paid, let's say $1 million a year, only $400,000 would count against the cap, and the rest would be paid by the owner. Originally, teams could sign one player as a designated player. However, teams could also trade their designated player slot away, with teams allowed to have a maximum of 2 slots. However, slowly there began to be more and more designated player slots until we get to the 3 slots we have today. Oh, and also you can no longer trade your designated player spots away if you didn't already know that. Otherwise, Miami would probably have a super team right now. This meant that in 2007, many teams were signing their first ever designated player. one of which is the man we're talking about today, Cuauhtemoc Blanco. According to Bohm, then Chicago Fire general manager John Guppy recounts the day Blanco was set to be unveiled. Guppy looks outside of his office window and notices that people are starting to line up for Blanco's unveiling. Normally not weird, until you realize that it was lunchtime and the unveiling wasn't set to begin until 5 p.m. that day. Guppy recounts that when the unofficial count came in, it was about 5,000 people that showed up for the unveiling, which rivals some of Chicago's attendance numbers in games in recent years. Sorry, unnecessary shots fired there. Where did this level of popularity and stardom come from, though? Let's tangent again. Blanco began his career in 1992 with Mexican side Club America at the age of 19. His time with Club America was off to an instant success, as the side would win CONCACAF Champions Cup in his first year there. This would just be the beginning of his success with Club America, as he would go on to win the Clausura in 2005, the Campeón de Campeones in 2005, and another CONCACAF Champions Cup in 2006. His personal success really looks to have taken off during and following his loan move to Mexican side Necaxa, where he would go on to score 21 goals in 19 appearances in 1998 and win the Invierno Golden Boot and Winter 1998 MVP, or the Balón de Oro. He followed that up with 24 goals in 29 appearances in 1999-2000 season. Following an unsuccessful loan spell with Real Valladolid, he would return to Club America to score 31 goals in 74 appearances across the next 2 seasons. The remaining years prior to the Chicago move resulted in another loan move, this time to Veracruz, who won the Apertura that season while he was there, and a few more years where he just casually won 2 more MVPs, giving him the joint most MVPs in Liga MX history. Now that we're caught up on Blanco, let's jump back to Chicago. Blanco was joining a strong Chicago side that finished 4th in the Supporter Shield and won the US Open Cup the season prior. Some might question as to whether this big-time arrival would throw a wrench into the already thriving Chicago Fire side led by Chris Wolf, Chris Armas, and Justin Mapp. However, Blanco would not miss a beat. And I think a quote from defender CJ Brown from Bohm's article sums up Blanco well when he said, "He didn't just love to win on the weekend. He loved to win in practice, in anything and everything we did." But not only was Blanco a competitor on the field, according to Bohm's article, he was also a great teammate to have in the locker room as well. He was a big prankster, especially with Kalen Carr as one of his common targets. According to a quote from Carr himself, Blanco used to call him espaguites, which means spaghetti, due to his curly, moppy hair. For the rest of Blanco's shenanigans, I'm going to leave you to read Bohm's article. And believe me, there are a lot of other stories in there, so I highly recommend checking it out. But Blanco's time with Chicago lasted only 3 years. And while his time there did not result in any team trophies, you'd be remiss to say that it wasn't a great success. Blanco finished with 16 goals and 21 assists and 62 appearances for the Fire, which warranted him an MVP finalist in 2 of the 3 seasons that he was there. Add to that a best 11 and 2 all-star appearances, and we're talking about a great start to the Chicago Fire designated player era. Again, I seriously implore all those interested to read Bohm's article because I barely scratched the surface on all of the incredible stories relating to Blanco, some of which have come from friend of the podcast, John Bush himself. So maybe if we want to get some more insight, we got to bring Bush back. The way I'll summarize them here is it was super easy to see why he had such a large following and was so well respected by many of his teammates. However, not everyone would probably agree with this statement, though. Along with the competitive streak previously mentioned by Brown, came at times a hothead. During his time with Chicago, Blanco had gotten into a fist fight with teammate Wilman Conde, and later on punched DC United player Clyde Sims during a US Open Cup match while trying to get the ball back after a foul was called. Did I mention that he also allegedly headbutted a DC United team official? Yeah, those actions led him to get a 2-year suspension in the US Open Cup. One of the longest suspensions in US Open Cup history. But safe to say, at this point, he's probably not going to serve the full suspension. I think the best way to wrap up Blanco's time with the Fire is with a quote from Frank Klopas, where he said, "There's not a lot of Cuauhtemocs out there. If you can find one, God bless you." So to kind of end things here, Blanco would return back to Mexico following his stint in Chicago and would ultimately finish his career where he started with Club America. After his career was finished, Blanco actually went into a career in politics, where he won the election as municipal president Cuernavaca. Later on, he would win the 2018 election for governor of Morelos. From footballer to politician, Blanco's career on and off the field seems to be exciting and full of stories. Luckily, as MLS fans, we got to be a part of those stories. He's a really like I seriously, when I say I did not scratch the surface of like the amount of quotes and stories people were talking about, like there were tons of them in the article, and they were really good too. Like he had a lot of really good moments where he was buying like 6 or 7 pizzas for the team, or he was like stopping at an In and Out on the way to pick up the reserves team to like get a bunch of burgers for them and everything. Like he genuinely seemed like a really fun guy to be around. He was a big prankster. I think Kalen Carr was also talking about some story where he was like tied up to a chair or something. I can't remember the full story there, but he seemed like he would love to mess around off the field, but on the field, based on everything they were saying, he seemed to be like really into it, very competitive, and I mean the numbers show it for sure.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, right? As much as he may not have contributed to a ton of goals and assists and stuff, but I think the big story from that is less about what he did on the field, more about what he did with the fans, right? How he brought the fans into things and really made them buy into the team again. And I think that's maybe a stretch here, but what they were trying to recreate with Jairo Torres for a little bit, like bring that community back into it. And then Jairo Torres was a complete bust.
In fairness, they barely played Torres.
Well, that's because he was a complete bust because he was not good, right? But if you want to talk about good, I mean, there's some good rivalries that are budding out right now. Maybe
Transition.
Inter Miami versus Cruz Azul, Nashville versus Club America. But before the Leagues Cup, where these started to sprout, we had the North American Superliga. And that is where these sorts of non-Champions League rivalries started to bud. This tournament was essentially the Leagues Cup before it was the full Leagues Cup, right? It was the top 4 teams in MLS and the 4 winners of the half seasons of Liga MX, the top 2 of each Clausura and Apertura. And that went on for a couple of years, playing against each other in and out until Don Garber comes out and says the 2 magic words: schedule congestion. And MLS decided that teams that made CONCACAF Champions League would not participate in the North American Superliga. So then it became the next 4 non-Champions League teams to make the Superliga from MLS versus the top 4 Liga MX sides. You kind of can see where this is going, right? Been here, done that. Yeah. At this time, Garber, as has been the trend over the last few months, noted that the Superliga was good for its time, but it's a good placeholder because what he was really trying to do was get CONCACAF to give more and more funding and focus to the Champions League, right? Same deal, just different tournament. So people who are screaming and yelling about Leagues Cup versus US Open Cup, learn your history because here's where we're about to go down. He said the Superliga was not needed, so it ended in 2010, but from 2007 to 2010, the 2 best leagues in the region came up against each other in both Superliga and Champions League and created some absolute bangers of a matchup. And that is where we get some of our stories today between the Houston Dynamo and Pachuca CF. So let's talk about a little bit about this history between the 2 sides before we talk about the specific games. Between 2007 and 2010, the sides met 7 times between 4 matches in the Champions League and 3 times in the Superliga. These games combined for 21 goals, 3 red cards, a PK shootout, and lifelong memories for fans in attendance. So let's jump into some of the best moments, starting with the Champions League of 2007. In this iteration of the tournament, Houston qualified by winning the 2006 MLS Cup. They knocked off Costa Rican side Punta Arenas 2-1 in the quarterfinals to get to Pachuca in the semis, where Pachuca won the 2006 Clausura and beat Marcanes 3-0 in the first round. Entering this first game at home in Robertson Stadium in the University of Houston in front of 13,000 fans, things got off to a little bit of a rocky start because the game actually didn't get off to a start at all. It was postponed a full day due to weather problems, which caused a power outage at the University of Houston. After a first half that seemed mostly on the side of Pachuca in terms of momentum, Brian Ching would get Houston on the board first with a powerful header in the 57th minute. Later in the half, Chris Wondolowski would enter as a sub. Just moments after his entrance, he did what he does best and tapped in from close range a service from Brad Davis to double the lead just before the full-time whistle. Though they had the lead at the end of it, the game was far from comfortable, as Pachuca had many clear-cut chances to go ahead, and the overall feeling was one of relief to have the lead at all. It's also important to note in this first game that Alejandro Moreno did have the chance to make it 3-0 right before the end of the match, but he squandered his effort, which made the second leg a little bit tighter than it should have. The first round kicked off on March 15th, that game. The second leg was a full 3 weeks later on April 5th, 2007. The gap gave Pachuca time to regroup and get after it, and away goals did not matter in this tie. So they just needed to score 3 goals plus whatever Houston scored, and they would move on. And they wasted 0 time getting back into it, scoring 4 minutes into the match, where main man of the day, Christian Jimenez, served a ball in, and after a bit of a scramble, Gabriel Caballero, another name to remember, would tap it on home. 10 minutes later, Jimenez would be given the first of a few PK attempts on the night, slotting it home to level the score on aggregate. The Dynamo at this point were so bunkered in that they actually struggled to play out and get any sort of rhythm going, just praying for the halftime whistle to regroup. They got there, and they were, in fact, able to regroup, because entering the second half, the Dynamo actually came out on the front foot. In the 53rd minute, Brian Mullen took the ball off of Dwayne De Rosario and fired one past a Pachuca keeper to restore the Dynamo's lead, a lead that lasted all of 5 minutes, when Jimenez sidestepped Brad Davis, tripped up, and earned a penalty, which he took himself and converted the aggregate score yet again. Fast forward to the 79th minute, when Brian Ching repeated his feat from leg one, rising highest to meet across and powering it home for the 4-3 aggregate lead, just for Pachuca to respond 7 minutes later when Caballero gets his head on the end of a cross and headed home from close range inside the far post. Zach Wells, the goalkeeper for the Houston Dynamo, saved them from a regulation time exit with some brilliant work to keep the game level before the full-time whistle. It seemed that it was going to take a moment of magic from somebody to win this game, and that's exactly what came from Pachuca's magic man, Jimenez. After picking up the ball some 25 yards out from goal, he prepped his touch and sent a rocket past Wells off the post and into the back of the net just before the final whistle of the first half of extra time. With the lead secured, it was time for the classic Liga MX tactic of playing only 3 of the 15 minutes on their feet and the rest of it on the ground. With their game plan working to perfection, it seemed all was lost until a late game corner came for Houston. The ball was served in again to a flurry of boxes, eventually tapped over the line, bringing the aggregate score level, but the goal was disallowed for a handball decision on Ching. And because there's no video evidence of this match easily accessible, we can say from this podcast without a shred of bias that it was probably a fixed and terrible call that should not have been made and was only there so that Liga MX could feel superior to MLS, right? Well, while they did not get the result they were looking for, they still had the opportunity to get their revenge when they would meet again 4 months later in the semifinals of the 2007 North American Superliga. Fast forward to August 14th of the same year, and it's a 96-degree day in Houston, ready to battle it out for a spot in the Super League final. 1 game, 1 leg, winner moves on. A combination of the heat and the memories from the last matchup must have combined to play a significant role in this game, as the game ended with 11 cards, 3 of them red, some late game heroics, and a penalty shootout of dreams. Houston, like the last time, got off to a flyer. Dwayne De Rosario would get on the end of a Brian Mullen service to give the Dynamo a 1-0 advantage in the 4th minute of this single-legged tie. Pachuca would see yellow twice just minutes after that, before Patrick Ianni would be sent off for a dog-so red in the 13th minute, meaning that the game that just ended with 9 goals on aggregate when 11v11 just got a lot more open for the next 77 minutes. Interestingly enough, no changes were made personnel-wise after this red card, and they actually played the same group into the second half until Corey Ash replaced Dwayne De Rosario. In the 28th minute, Pachuca would go level, though, through Tacho, at which the score would stay heading into the half. Chitiva would give Pachuca the lead in the 61st minute, leaving Houston searching for a goal. With 7 minutes to go in regulation, Eddie Robinson would rise highest to win a header and nod it home to bring Houston level and send it into extra time. In the second half, 5 yellow cards were shown, including 2 to Pachuca goal scorer Chivita, sending him off in the 85th minute and leveling the game in terms of players. As we head into extra time, Jaime Correa was shown yellow for an action which Corey Ash didn't like too much, and he retaliated in turn. For his action, he too would see a straight red, and Houston would have to play down 9 men versus 10. Houston would hold on to see PKs, but Brian Ching would hit the post, and Joseph Ingüenya would see his chip shot saved, allowing Pachuca to win the semifinals and move on to the final game. Games like this set the tone for what this rivalry meant and got fans excited for those games when they rolled around, as scarce as they were. They would meet again in the next edition of the Superliga, and Houston would get their revenge with a 2-0 victory to move on to the finals and play New England, where they would eventually lose once again in PKs. They would meet again in the Champions League the following year, where Pachuca would walk away with easy 3-0 victory. But the rivalry from early days would be ended with a 2-1 Superliga group stage win for the Houston Dynamo, thanks to an 85th minute brace securing winner by Joseph Nguenya, the same man who missed his penalty just a few years before. Unfortunately, based on form and the way things went on, the two sides did not meet again until the 2023 Leagues Cup, where they saw a thrilling scoreless draw go to PKs and Houston finish on top. While it was uneventful at its most exciting parts, could the revival of a tournament like Leagues Cup be the spark that is needed to pick this rivalry back up? Only time will tell.
Sorry, we're not allowed to support Leagues Cup on this podcast. We have to absolutely destroy it and melt it into the ground. This rivalry just can't happen unless it's in CONCACAF Champions League.
I found it super interesting the very similar phrasing that was used between 2007 and today, right? Oh, we're going to play this tournament so that somebody else will put more money into their tournament. And then, oh, we can't really play this tournament because the schedule's a little bit too congested. So we're going to pick and choose who goes to this tournament. Like, it's all
that
just
practice.
history repeating itself, right? So, and that made me think, like, how long does the Leagues Cup actually last? Now, I think it continues to last for a while, but it wouldn't shock me if they come back and be like, okay, Leagues Cup was fun. U.S. Open Cup put their money back where their mouth was supposed to be. Let's go back and do things the way it was before. Because that's what happened here, right? The Superliga no longer exists. It lasted about 4 years, 5 years, and then bang, right back to Champions League, right?
Yeah, who knows? Might be different now, just considering all the changes and circumstances, but who knows? You know who plays Pachuca this year?
No.
Red Bull.
Oh, are they in our group? It's us in New England and Pachuca?
You, Pachuca, and Toronto.
Oh, okay. So we might actually move on. Nice.
Don't discount current 2024 Toronto. They're a different animal.
Well, Insigne's out for 6 weeks, so
That's not gonna help.
So we hope you enjoyed the revival of MLS History Retold. We had a great time researching and sharing these stories. As you can tell, they go so much deeper. So be sure to go and dive into these topics for yourself. We can't spend a whole hour talking about them for you because other people have done good work too. We're citing them and we're giving them their shouts, but we don't want to take all of their notes. So make sure you go give everybody who was mentioned in these stories some love and do some research and come back and let us know what you think about what we've been talking about and what other stories we should talk about. Make sure you follow us wherever you get your podcast on all your podcasting platforms. Go visit our website or our link tree to go figure out where all of those links hide. Make sure you follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok, so that you can see when we post clips like this and our stories. Super, super fun. So really enjoyed doing this, Connor. Thank you for being here with me, and we hope everybody enjoyed listening. We will see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. See ya.